Boy terrified. After school bus driver intentionally left him at wrong stop. What happens next? It was getting dark. The sky had turned a soft blue, slowly fading into night. The streetlights hadn't come on yet, and everything looked strange. An 8-year-old boy stood all alone at a bus stop. His name was Tyrell. He clutched his backpack tight to his chest, his hands shaking. His eyes scanned the empty road, his heart beating fast. He whispered into the cold air, "Is anyone there?" But there was no answer, just the sound of wind rustling through the trees and a dog barking far away. This wasn't his stop. He knew it the moment he stepped off the bus. The houses looked different. The street names didn't match, and the worst part? The driver had looked right at him before closing the doors and driving off. He left him there, on purpose. Tyrell took a step back. His small legs trembled. The shadows around him felt too big, the silence too loud. He had no idea where he was. He had no phone, no map, no one to call. Just a scared little boy far from home, waiting for something, anything to make this nightmare go away. He didn't know what to do. Should he start walking? Should he wait right there? His mom always told him to stay put if he ever got lost. But the wind was getting colder, and the fear in his chest was growing stronger. He sat on the edge of the curb and pulled his knees up, resting his chin on them. His eyes started to sting, but he blinked fast. He didn't want to cry. Big boys don't cry, right? Still, he couldn't stop the thoughts racing through his head. Why did Mr. Nelson leave him here? What did he do wrong? He thought about the moment it happened, how the driver snapped at him for something he didn't even do. Another boy had pushed him, and when Tyrell tried to explain, Mr. Nelson didn't listen. He just told him to get off the bus. And now here he was, alone. Tyrell looked around, hoping to spot a store or someone walking by. But the street was quiet. Too quiet. Every small sound made him jump. A rustling bush, a leaf blowing by, a flickering light in a window far down the road. He hugged his backpack tighter. "I want to go home," he whispered. He thought about his mom, how she must be wondering where he was. She'd be so worried. She always told him to be brave, even when things were hard. But this didn't feel like something he could be brave through. This felt big. Too big for someone his age. Still, he stood up. His legs were shaky, and his backpack felt heavy. But he knew he couldn't just sit there forever. Maybe if he walked far enough, he'd find a place he recognized, or someone who could help. As he began walking, every house looked like the last. Big lawns, tall fences, closed windows. Nobody was outside, no one even peeking through the curtains. Tyrell swallowed the lump in his throat. "It's okay," he whispered to himself. "Just keep walking." But every few steps, he stopped to look around. He was afraid to go too far. What if he went the wrong way? What if he got even more lost? Then he saw it. A porch light, flickering in the distance. A small glow of hope. His heart beat faster. Maybe someone was home. Maybe they could help. He stood there, frozen, staring at the light. A part of him wanted to run toward it. But another part was scared. What if the people inside weren't nice? What if they didn't believe him? His feet stayed still. His eyes filled with tears he could no longer fight. And finally, he did the one thing he'd been trying not to do. He cried. Silent at first. Then louder. His sobs filled the empty street. He felt so small, so forgotten. But even as the tears fell, something inside him whispered, "You have to. Keep going. You can't give up." Tyrell wiped his face with his sleeve. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but right now, he had to find a way out of this. For himself. And for the mom he knew was out there, probably searching, praying, hoping her little boy would come home. And Tyrell was going to try. Just a few months ago, Tyrell's life had felt completely different. Back in the old neighborhood, things made sense. He knew every street, every corner store, and every neighbor. People smiled at him when he passed by. He had friends to play with after school, and he never had to wonder if someone would stand up for him when something went wrong. But all of that changed the day his mom said they had to move. She had gotten a better job, something stable, something that paid well. "This is going to be a fresh start," she told him, her eyes hopeful as she packed up their small apartment. "A bigger house, a safer town, better schools. You'll make new friends in no time." Tyrell didn't want to argue. He saw how hard she worked. He knew how much she sacrificed just to keep things going. But deep down, he didn't feel excited. He felt scared. He just didn't say it out loud. The new neighborhood looked nice, maybe too nice. Big houses, perfect lawns, the kind of place where people closed their doors early and didn't wave at strangers. The first day they arrived, Tyrell looked around at the unfamiliar streets and felt something heavy settle in his chest. Even the kids seemed different. When he tried to say hello to a group playing across the street, they barely looked at him. One of them shrugged and said, "We're kind of busy right now." That was it. That's how it started. He told himself it was just day one. Things would get better. His mom said so. He held on to that. Then school started. That first morning, Tyrell waited at the bus stop, nervous but hopeful. He had on his best shirt, a new backpack, and a lunch his mom woke up early to pack. When the bus pulled up, he hesitated. His heart pounded in his ears. The driver was an older man. Gray hair, deep lines across his face. He didn't smile when the doors opened. Just stared. "Name?" he barked. "Tyrell," the boy stammered. The driver grunted and marked something on a clipboard. "Sit down," he said without looking. Tyrell shuffled to the back and sat quietly by himself. The other kids laughed and joked with each other, but no one said a word to him. He stared out the window and watched the streets roll by, counting the seconds until it would be over. That was Mr. Nelson, the school bus driver, the man who barely said a word to Tyrell after that first day. Unless it was to scold him, never once smiled, never once called him by his name again. Just sharp looks and short commands. At first, Tyrell thought he was imagining it. Maybe Mr. Nelson was like that with all the kids. But the more he watched, the more he noticed. Mr. Nelson laughed and chatted with the other students. He waved to some of the parents. But when it came to Tyrell, there was only silence, or something colder. Weeks passed, and things only got worse. The kids noticed too. They started calling him names, laughing when the driver ignored him or passed his stop. One morning, the bus zoomed right past without even slowing down, even though Tyrell had been standing there on time, waving with both arms. He had to walk a mile to school that day. Showed up late, got in trouble with his teacher. When he tried to explain, she just told him to be more responsible next time. He felt invisible. That night at dinner, Tyrell tried to bring it up. "I don't think the bus driver likes me," he said quietly. His mom looked up from her plate, frowning. "Mr. Nelson?" Tyrell nodded. "What makes you say that?" He tried to explain the glares, the way the man talked to other kids but not him, how he skipped his stop sometimes on purpose. But the more he talked, the more his mom's face softened, not in anger, but in worry, like she didn't know what to do. "I'm sure he's just tired, baby," she said. "Driving a bus full of noisy kids every day can't be easy. Maybe he doesn't realize how he's coming across." Tyrell nodded, but the words stung. He wasn't noisy. He wasn't causing trouble. He just wanted to feel like he belonged. But the truth was, the more he rode that bus, the more alone he felt. Then came the day he was almost left behind again. The bus slowed near his stop, just like usual. Tyrell stood up, backpack slung over his shoulder. But just before the doors opened, Mr. Nelson looked at him through the mirror and drove right past it. Tyrell had to shout to get him to stop. The kids laughed, and someone muttered, "Guess he's tired of you." That night, Tyrell didn't say anything to his mom. What was the point? And yet, deep down, something was building. A quiet pain that was turning into something else. He was starting to believe that maybe, just maybe, he really didn't belong here. But what he didn't know was that this silent storm, the quiet bullying, the missed stops, the cold stares, was leading to something worse. Something that would change everything. Because the next time Mr. Nelson told him to get off that bus, he wouldn't just miss a stop, he'd be left behind, on purpose, and no one was coming to help. Every morning started the same way. Tyrell would wake up early, get dressed in silence, and sit at the kitchen table while his mom made breakfast. She always smiled at him, always told him to have a good day. But Tyrell had stopped smiling back. Not because he didn't love her. He just didn't have the energy anymore. The bus ride to school had become the hardest part of his day. Not the classes, not the homework, not even the kids who ignored him on the playground. It was the ride. Every time he stepped onto that yellow bus, his stomach tightened. He could feel every stare. He could hear every whisper, even if no one said his name out loud. And Mr. Nelson? He never missed a chance to remind Tyrell he didn't belong. Some mornings, the driver would pretend not to see him standing at the stop, even when Tyrell was waving with both hands. The bus would roll right past, and Tyrell would be forced to run after it or walk the long stretch to school alone. Other times, Mr. Nelson would slam the brakes at his stop without saying a word, as if to say, "Hurry up and get out." Once, when Tyrell stepped on the bus and offered a soft, "Good morning," Mr. Nelson just grunted and looked away. The other kids picked up on it. They could feel the energy, and slowly, it gave them permission to be mean. To join in. One boy in particular, loud, always surrounded by others, began mocking Tyrell every morning. "Hey, look who almost missed the bus again. Maybe Mr. Nelson just didn't see you." He'd laugh, nudging his friends. Tyrell would keep his head down, gripping his backpack tight and heading for the back seat. He hated that seat. It felt like being banished, but there were no other options. Every time he sat anywhere else, someone would whisper or roll their eyes or shift away as if his presence was some kind of problem. At school, it wasn't much. Better. Teachers were busy, classes were big, and no one really noticed the quiet boy who never raised his hand anymore. During lunch, Tyrell sat at the end of a long table, nibbling his sandwich while the other kids shared jokes and phone screens. Sometimes he'd pretend to read a book just so he wouldn't look so alone. The worst part, he was starting to believe, what the silence was telling him. That maybe he wasn't enough. Maybe he was the problem. One day, he came home with a small scrape on his elbow from being shoved in the bus aisle. When his mom asked what happened, he just said, "Tripped." He didn't want to make her worry again. He knew she already had so much on her plate with work, bills, and being on her feet all day at the hospital, so he kept it all inside. But inside, things were building. He started having trouble sleeping. His dreams were filled with buses driving away, leaving him alone on strange streets. Sometimes he'd wake up sweating, thinking he'd missed his stop, only to find himself safe in his bed. He tried once more to talk to his mom. She was in the kitchen, going through papers when he walked in and stood there quietly. She looked up and smiled. "Hey, sweetheart, what's up?" Tyrell didn't speak right away. Then he blurted it out. "Mr. Nelson doesn't like me. He skips my stop on purpose. He stares at me like he's mad. And the kids are mean too. I don't think they want me on the bus." His mom's face softened, but her expression also looked tired, like she was hearing something she couldn't fix. "Oh, baby," she said. walking over and putting a hand on his shoulder. I know it's been hard. But sometimes when people are different, it takes time for others to get used to them. Maybe he just doesn't realize how he's making you feel. Tyrell nodded, even though it felt like she didn't really get it. That night. He stayed up staring at the ceiling, wondering how much longer he could take it. He wanted to go back to his old school, his old friends, the place where people laughed with him, not at him, but deep down, he knew that wasn't possible. The next morning came too fast. As always, he walked to the bus stop with slow steps, wishing the ride didn't have to happen. But the bus pulled up. Mr. Nelson at the wheel. Same scowl, same silence. Tyrell climbed aboard, sat in his usual seat, and tried to disappear. It was on this day, this exact day, that everything would finally fall apart. The boy who always teased him was louder than usual. His words sharper, his friends laughing harder. Tyrell did his best to ignore it, but when the bus hit a small bump in the road, his shoulder accidentally brushed against the boy sitting next to him. The boy turned fast. "Hey, watch it!" He yelled and shoved Tyrell hard. Tyrell stumbled, nearly falling into the aisle. The bus went quiet for a second, then laughter. Not with him, at him. What's going on back there? Mr. Nelson barked, his voice echoing through the bus. Before Tyrell could explain, the other boy shouted, "He won't stop pushing me! He's being annoying on purpose!" Tyrell froze. That wasn't true. It wasn't. But Mr. Nelson didn't ask questions. He just looked in the mirror and said something that made Tyrell's blood run cold. "You're getting off at the next stop." Tyrell blinked. But that's not my stop." "Should have thought of that before causing trouble," Mr. Nelson growled. Tyrell looked around. Every kid stared back. No one spoke, no one helped. And just like that, the bus kept moving. To a place he didn't know, to a stop he had never seen, to the moment everything would change. The bus rolled to a slow stop. Tyrell's heart thudded in his chest. He could see through the window. The houses were bigger, spaced far apart, and none of them looked familiar. This wasn't his stop. He had never even seen this street before. The engine let out a low hum as the door swung open with a sharp hiss. Mr. Nelson didn't say a word. He didn't even look at Tyrell. He just stared out the windshield, waiting. Tyrell stayed frozen in his seat. Maybe if he didn't move, if he stayed quiet, the driver would change his mind. Maybe someone would speak up and say, "This isn't right." But no one said anything. The laughter had died. The kids weren't mocking anymore. They were just silent, watching. Mr. Nelson finally spoke, voice cold and firm. I set off. Tyrell looked around, hoping someone, anyone would help him. But the other kids just looked away. Some out the window, some down at their shoes. It was like no one wanted to get involved. "But this isn't where I live," Tyrell said, his voice trembling. "That's not my problem," the driver muttered. Tyrell stood slowly, legs shaking as he stepped into the aisle. He held his backpack close, like it could protect him somehow. As he walked toward the front of the bus, he felt everyone's eyes on him, but no one spoke. No one asked Mr. Nelson to stop. He paused at the front, one last desperate glance at the man behind the wheel. "Please, I don't know where I am. Mister." Nelson finally looked at him, but there was no sympathy in his eyes. Just something hard. Cold. Unbothered. "You'll figure it out." The door hissed again, and with that, Tyrell stepped off. The door shut behind him before he could even turn around. He stood there, in the middle of a strange street, watching the yellow bus disappear around a corner like it had never even been there. Just like that, he was alone. The wind blew against his jacket. The sky was cloudy now, and the last bit of sun was sinking fast behind the houses. The air smelled like fresh-cut grass and cold pavement. Tyrell looked around, but nothing looked familiar. No street signs he recognized, no faces he knew, no sound but his own breathing. He had been left behind. He tried to stay calm. He remembered his mom's voice. If you're ever lost, don't panic. Stay where you are. Look for help. Don't wander too far. But this didn't feel like just being lost. This felt like being abandoned. He sat on the curb, just outside someone's tall wooden fence, and tried to think. His chest felt tight. His fingers dug into the straps of his backpack like they were the only thing keeping him grounded. What should I do? He looked up and down the street. No one walking. No open doors. No lights turning on. Just long driveways and tall trees. He stood up, walked a few feet one way, then stopped, turned back, walked a few feet the other way, stopped again. His feet didn't know where to go because his brain didn't know either. He pulled out a folded piece of paper from his backpack, a small drawing he had made at school. His name was scribbled at the bottom, Tyrell J. He held it like it might somehow prove who he was if he found someone to ask for help. He thought about knocking on a door. But what would he even say? Hi, my bus driver kicked me off. Can you help? Me? He wasn't sure anyone would believe him. He wasn't sure he believed it. A car drove past, its headlights flashing in his eyes. He stepped back fast, heart jumping. It didn't stop, just kept going. Like everything else, Tyrell walked a little farther, hoping to see something familiar. A gas station, a park, a store, anything. But all he saw were more houses, all closed up. No signs of life. The quiet was deafening. He tried calling out, just once. Hello? Nothing. He sat down again, trying to hold in the tears building behind his eyes. He had done everything right. He had followed the rules. He had been quiet, respectful. And still, here he was, punished for something he didn't do. Why? Why? Him? He rested his head on his knees and let the tears fall quietly. He thought of his mom. She must be wondering where he was. Maybe she was already calling the school. Maybe she was outside right now, looking for him, her heart racing. The thought of her made the tears come faster. I'm trying, Mom, he whispered. I just don't know where I am. Then something inside him shifted. It was small, just a flicker. But it was there. You can't stay here forever. Wiping his face with his sleeve, Tyrell stood again. His knees were sore from the cold concrete, and his backpack felt like it weighed 100 pounds. But he stood. He started walking. Not fast, not confidently, but step by step. He told himself to stay on the sidewalk, to look for a street sign, to not give up. His fear was still there, but something else had joined it. Something that sounded like his mom's voice inside his head. You're stronger than you think. So he walked. He didn't know where he was going yet, or who he might find, but he was done sitting and waiting for someone to come save him. If he wanted to make it home, he had to try. Tyrell walked. Every step felt heavier than the last. His shoes made soft sounds against the sidewalk, and the air grew colder as the sun disappeared behind the rooftops. The sky, once soft and blue, had turned gray, and soon a pale orange streetlight buzzed to life overhead. It was the first light he'd seen in what felt like forever. His fingers were cold. He shoved them deep into his jacket pockets, but it didn't help much. His backpack bounced against his back with every step, but he didn't stop. He was afraid that if he stopped again, he'd never be able to start moving. The streets all looked the same. Big houses, empty driveways, quiet lawns. Tyrell kept hoping to see something he recognized. A park, a bus stop sign. Anything, but everything. Here felt like it belonged to someone else's world, not his. A sound behind him made him jump, a dog barking, sharp, loud, somewhere behind a fence. He walked faster, heart pounding again. He tried to remind himself it couldn't get through. Still, fear clung to him like a second skin. He turned a corner and saw a small yellow mailbox shaped like a duck. He didn't know why, but something about it made him stop. It was the first thing he'd seen that didn't feel perfect and polished. It felt real, like a kid lived there. Maybe someone kind. He stood in front of the house for a minute, staring at the light on the porch. It flickered slightly. He thought about walking up the steps. Just knock on the door, just say, "I need help. I got off the bus and I'm lost." But his feet wouldn't move. He imagined someone answering and yelling at him, telling him to go away, or worse, calling. The police. Would they believe him? Would they even listen? He backed away and turned around. That's when he heard it. A car. Not just any car. A familiar one. His head snapped toward the street, eyes wide. A silver SUV rolled slowly around the bend, headlights cutting through the early evening haze. It looked like his mom's. He froze. And then, a voice. Tyrell. Tyrell. His name. His real name. Not a whisper, not a command, a call, a cry, full of worry, full of love. His heart leapt as the car slammed to a stop. The door flung open before the engine was even turned off. It was her. "Mom!" he shouted, his voice cracking as he ran. She met him halfway, dropping to her knees in the middle of the sidewalk, arms wide open. He crashed into her chest, burying his face in her jacket. Her arms wrapped around him tight, not letting go. She was crying. He could feel it, her shoulders shaking, her hand running through his hair, her voice trembling as she whispered, "I've got you. I've got you. You're safe now." Tyrell sobbed against her. Everything he had been holding in, the fear, the loneliness, the hurt, came pouring out like a flood. He didn't try to stop it. He just held on. Another figure stepped out of the car, her friend from work. She stayed back, giving them space, tears in her eyes too. After a long time, Tyrell finally lifted his head. "I didn't know where I was," he whispered. "I know, baby," his mom said, holding his face in her hands. "I looked everywhere. I've been driving around for hours. I called the school. I called the bus depot. No one knew where you were. I was so scared." "Mr. Nelson made me get off," Tyrell said, his voice hoarse. "I told him it wasn't my stop, but he didn't care." His mom's face changed. Her eyes, still red from crying, filled with something new. Anger. The quiet kind. The kind that said this isn't over. She looked over her shoulder, then back at her son. "You don't have to say anything else right now. Let's go home, okay?" Tyrell nodded. The ride back felt like a dream. His mom's friend handed him a blanket from the back seat, wrapping it around his shoulders. They didn't talk much. Just soft voices, quiet sniffles, and the sound of tires rolling down familiar roads. When they turned into their street, Tyrell felt a wave of relief wash over him. Porch lights, neighbors' cars, the smell of someone cooking dinner, all of it made his heart settle just a little. Home. The word never meant so much. Inside, his mom made him hot cocoa and sat with him on the couch, one arm wrapped around his shoulders, like she couldn't stand to let go again. Tyrell didn't want to move either. Eventually, she looked down at him. "Do you want to talk about it now? Or maybe tomorrow?" He took a deep breath. "I want to tell you everything," he said. And he did. From the first missed stop, to the teasing, to the way Mr. Nelson looked at him every morning, to the moment he was left alone on that strange street. His mom listened, really listened. This time, there were no soft excuses, no quick dismissals. When he finished, She leaned forward and kissed his forehead. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. "I should have believed you the first time. I won't make that mistake again." Then she stood, her voice steady. "Tomorrow, we're going to the school. I don't care how busy they are. They're going to hear what happened, and Mr. Nelson is going to answer for what he did." Tyrell nodded slowly. He didn't know what would happen next. But for the first time in a long time, he didn't feel alone. The next morning came too early. Tyrell had barely slept, but not because of fear this time. It was different. His body was tired, but his mind was racing. He kept thinking about what would happen today. What if no one believed him again? What if the school just shrugged it off like before? Still, he got up. He dressed in clean clothes, brushed his hair and packed his bag, not with books this time, but with the truth. His mom didn't say much as she drove. She had that look on her face, the one she got when something mattered, really mattered. Her hands gripped the steering wheel tight, her lips pressed in a straight line. She wasn't just angry, she was focused. She was going to fight for him. When they walked into the school's front office, everything felt too quiet. The receptionist gave a polite smile. "Good morning. Do you have an appointment?" Tyrell's mom didn't flinch. "No, but we need to speak to the principal. Right, now. It's urgent." The receptionist hesitated. "He's in a meeting." "My son was dropped in a random neighborhood by your school bus driver," she said, her voice calm, but sharp like glass. "I'm sure the meeting can wait." The room went still. Within minutes, they were sitting across from Principal Harris, a tall man with tired eyes and a soft voice. He leaned forward on his desk. "What seems to be the issue?" Tyrell's mom didn't waste a second. She told the story, clear, detailed, and raw. She didn't sugarcoat anything. She described how Mr. Nelson had ignored her son for weeks, skipped stops, let kids tease him, and finally left him alone in an unfamiliar neighborhood. As she spoke, Tyrell sat beside her, staring down at his hands, afraid to look up. But then, the principal turned to him and asked gently, "Is that all true, Tyrell?" Tyrell nodded slowly. "Yes, sir." "And this wasn't the first time?" Tyrell's voice was soft. "No, it's been happening since I got here." There was silence. "Principal." Harris leaned back, rubbing his forehead. "This is very serious." His mom wasn't done. "You want to know the worst part? I told my son to give it time. I didn't believe him when he said something was wrong. I failed him. But now that I know, I won't stop until someone takes responsibility." The principal swallowed hard. "We will investigate this, I promise." "I don't want promises," she said. "I want action." And just when the meeting was about to end, something happened that no one expected. The receptionist poked her head in. "Excuse me, there are a few other parents here. They heard about what happened. They'd like to speak with you too." Principal. Harris blinked. "Other parents?" Within minutes, 3 more parents were in the room. One of them, a tall man in a navy jacket, spoke first. "I'm here because something similar happened to my son last month. I thought it was just a one-off. Now I'm not so sure." Another woman added, "My daughter told me Mr. Nelson never talks to the kids who look like Tyrell. She said he sometimes skips their stops too. I should have said something earlier." "I'm sorry." Tyrell looked up for the first time. He felt confused and strangely seen. He wasn't the only one. It wasn't just about him. Principal Harris listened as more stories poured out. Every one of them pointed in the same direction, a long, quiet pattern of Mr. Nelson treating some kids differently, ignoring them, dismissing them, singling them out without ever saying a word. It was like no one noticed because it wasn't loud, but now they couldn't ignore it. "I'll speak to the district today," Principal Harris said finally. "We'll be placing Mr. Nelson on leave immediately, and we'll begin a formal investigation." Tyrell's mom nodded slowly. She wasn't smiling, but there was a look in her eyes, like something had finally cracked open, like truth had been buried under silence for too long. And now it was finally breathing. As they left the school, Tyrell felt the weight on his chest lighten. Not gone, not yet, but lighter. In the parking lot, his mom crouched down and looked him in the eyes. "You did something brave today," she said. Tyrell hesitated. "Do you think things will change?" His mom nodded. "They already are?" Over the next week, everything shifted. Mr. Nelson was officially suspended. The school sent out a letter to all parents explaining that a review was underway. Tyrell's story began to spread, not just through school, but the whole neighborhood. Some people avoided them, unsure of what to say. Others came forward, finally sharing their own stories. Whispers turned into real conversations. Tyrell started being called brave by kids who used to ignore him. One day, a girl who sat near him in class passed him a folded note. "I'm sorry. I should have said something that day on the bus. I see you now." He kept that note in his pocket for the rest of the day. At home, his mom stayed involved. She called the district, attended every school meeting. She made sure Tyrell was never overlooked again. But more than that, she stayed close. They talked more now, not just about the bus, about everything, about how silence can hurt just as much as words, about how some people pretend not to see what's wrong, and how that's just as dangerous. One night, as Tyrell sat on the porch watching the sunset, his mom joined him with 2 cups of hot chocolate. "You know," she said, "I used to think being strong meant staying quiet. But you taught me that sometimes being strong means speaking up, even when your voice shakes." Tyrell looked at her, then down at his hands. "I didn't want to be brave," he whispered. His mom smiled softly. "Bravery never starts with wanting it. It starts with needing it." They sat together in silence as the sky turned pink and the crickets began to sing. Something was healing, and for the first time in a long time, Tyrell felt it. This wasn't just about what happened to him. It was about making sure it never happened again. 3 months had passed since that day. The day Tyrell stood alone on a strange sidewalk, cold and scared, waiting for someone to find him. That memory still lived in him, not as sharp as before, but never far, like a quiet scar that didn't hurt anymore, but still reminded him of what he survived. So much had changed. Mr. Nelson was gone. Fired after the investigation confirmed what many families had finally come forward to say. His behavior wasn't just unfair, it was dangerous, discriminatory. The district issued an official apology to Tyrell and his mom. Not just a letter. They sat down with them in person, and they listened. The school added new training programs for staff, not just about safety, but about respect, inclusion, compassion. Words that used to feel like posters on the wall now meant something. Tyrell's name came up often at those meetings, quietly, respectfully, as the kid who spoke up when no one else did. The boy who made people take a second look at things they had ignored for too long. But that's not what mattered most to Tyrell. What mattered was that life had started to feel normal again, only better. He wasn't just the boy from the bus story anymore. He was just Tyrell, and people saw him now. Really saw him. Mrs. Thompson, the new bus driver, was warm and kind, with a bright smile and eyes that reminded him of someone's grandma. She greeted every kid by name each morning. Every day, she made sure Tyrell got to his stop safely. Sometimes, she even asked him how his day went. It was simple, but it mattered. At school, things had shifted too. The kids who used to tease him now nodded hello. Some had even said sorry. Real apologies. Quiet and awkward, but sincere. A few even sat with him at lunch. They didn't talk about the past. They just shared snacks and stories and jokes like nothing had happened. That was enough. He made new friends. Slowly, naturally. The kind who didn't need him to explain himself. The kind who just liked him for who he was. At home, his mom smiled more, laughed more. They cooked together, watched movies, took walks around the neighborhood. Every once in a while, she'd squeeze his shoulder and say, "I'm proud of you," out of nowhere. And he knew she meant it. One evening, as summer drew close and the school year wound down, Tyrell sat on the porch again, watching the sun drop. Behind the rooftops. His mom sat beside him, sipping tea, eyes on the sky. He was quiet for a while. Then he said softly, "Do you think Mr. Nelson ever really understood what he did?" She didn't answer right away. Then she said, "Maybe. Maybe not. But whether he did or didn't, you did your part. You told the truth. You stood up when it mattered. That's what counts." Tyrell nodded slowly. The next day, something unexpected happened. A letter came in the mail. His mom opened it, read the name at the top, and gently handed it to him. It was from Mr. Nelson. Tyrell hesitated before reading. Then slowly, his eyes scanned the page. The letter wasn't long, but it said a lot. Mr. Nelson wrote that he had spent the last few months reflecting, that he never fully realized the damage he'd caused to Tyrell and others until the stories came out. He admitted that he treated some kids differently, whether he meant to or not, and he apologized. Genuinely, not just for what he did, but for what he let continue for so long. He ended the letter with one simple line: "You are braver than I ever was. I hope your future is bright, and I'm sorry for getting in the way of it." Tyrell sat still for a long time after reading it. Then he folded the paper, carefully, and tucked it into his desk drawer. He didn't know if forgiveness came that easily. But it felt good to know someone had listened, even if it came late. The last day of school came with warm sunlight and laughter. Kids hugged, signed yearbooks, shared plans for summer. Tyrell stepped onto the bus one final time that year, greeted by Mrs. Thompson's usual cheerful voice. "Ready for summer, Tyrell?" He smiled and nodded. "Yeah, I think I am." He took his seat, not in the back this time. He sat near the front, next to a friend. The bus pulled away from the school, and as it rumbled down the road, Tyrell turned to look out the window one more time. The school was still there. So was the street. But he was different now. He had walked through fear. He had stood up for himself, even when his voice shook, and he had been heard. When the bus reached his stop, he stepped off and saw his mom waiting, just like she had been all year. Only now he ran toward her. Not with fear, but with excitement. "Last day, huh?" She smiled. "We made it," he said, beaming. As they walked home together, side by side, Tyrell looked up at the sky. It wasn't gray anymore. It was blue, soft, peaceful. The kind of blue that felt like a beginning. Because that's what it was. A new chapter. Not just for him, but for every kid who's ever been made to feel small or invisible. Tyrell's story wasn't just about fear. It was about fighting back with truth. It was about finding your voice, even when no one wants to hear it. And it was about knowing, no matter what anyone says, that you matter. You always did, and you always will. Closing voiceover for YouTube. If Tyrell's story moved you, share it. Comment below. What would you have done in his shoes? And don't forget to subscribe for more real-life stories that speak from the heart. Because sometimes, the smallest voices carry the biggest truths.